What does it do? Does it upload it onto somewhere?
There we go. It's now live.
Perfect.
So good evening, everyone. If you joined us, the Perfect Balance Clinic Hour of Hour. And I've been joined this evening by Stan Madiri. So thank you very much for joining me. And George Carter. So George,
Good pronunciation.
Yeah, not bad. I've been working on it. How's your day been?
Sorry?
How's your day been today?
Yeah, not bad. Working. I'm one of the lucky ones that hasn't been put on furlough. And I'm still working away. So I've been looking forward to this tonight. I had my dinner quickly and made sure I dibs the room to make sure that I was free for this. So no, I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. So you've got an interesting story which we're going to ask you to share a little bit because I think it's a really inspirational story about how you can come back from injury. And we're talking about recovering from injury from athletics, weren't we, Stan? And George popped up and said he'd be more than happy to come online and share his story, which I think would be great. But Stan, give us some background about yourself. What's your background, mate?
Oh, well, I'm a coach. I'm a speed coach, essentially, predominantly in the track and field area. And but because I focus on speed, that tends to work with. I tend to work there. That tends to bring in a lot of other sporting disciplines where speed is an advantage. And if you and I will agree that there's not a sport really that, we cannot do with speed. So yes, my specialism is speed, and with an emphasis from a neuromechanical point of view, which is essentially what the role of the central nervous system, the role of sensory organs in contributing to movement efficiency. So that's something that really interests me, and that's what I make contribution with athletes, in trying to get them to gain the most from their movement potential. So that's what I do, Steve.
Excellent, good. And George, let's hear it. What's your background, mate? Because you said you work in an office, but we've obviously known each other because we've tried to help you with your recoveries from sport, recovery to sport, but you've got several things that you do at the moment, haven't you?
Yeah, so like you said, unfortunately at the moment, if you like, I work 9 to 5 in an office job in recruitment, but I play semi-professional football as well. So that consists of, training 2 or 3 times a week with the team, and playing once on a Saturday, around everyone's job. So you've got people that are working on building sites, PE teachers, construction, recruitment consultants like me. So definitely a very kind of group of people. But I mean, from my point of view, sitting in an office all day and then looking to go and play football in the evening doesn't really correlate too well, which could have been part of problems of my injuries, etc. But so I play semi-professional football at the moment, as well as working. And so, I mean, in regard, do you want me to get into my background of kind of where everything kicked off, or?
Yeah, it'd be good to know a little bit about, because a lot of people get into football and it's quite a difficult sport to kind of get anywhere with, isn't it? Because there's a lot of people, so it's very competitive.
Of course, yeah. I mean, look, probably a massive percentage of boys and girls in the UK will start off at a young age playing football. And I grew up, playing Sunday league and youth leagues with at a top level of that kind of capacity, not in a professional football club. And there's hundreds and thousands of kids that are all touted to be very good professional footballers, etc. at that age. And the older and older you get, like you said, it's very difficult to stick by that. I mean, number one, it's very competitive. So there's how many thousands of people in the country that, and now abroad, it's so easy to kind of get people in and out of from foreign countries to come in and play. So you see, from the ages of about 16 to 17, that number really slash down, because there is a level of commitment to it. Like I said, you get people that are now working full time and can't fit around their schedules and things like that. So it does become very, very difficult. And I think if you're looking from a semi-professional point of view, you're not contracted to a football club, or you're not, getting nutrition advice or physio advice, etc., off the back of the club 9 times out of 10. So at this kind of semi-professional level, a lot of it you have to kind of take into your own hands. Whether that's going to the gym after your work. Obviously, we train Tuesdays and Thursdays, but other than that, everything's kind of down to you. And whether that's getting advice from physiotherapists or personal trainers or specialists such as you two, it's not something that at this level, people take into their own hands and excel with. So that's where I think the gap is bridged between semi-professional football and professional football. And of course, look, when you're in a professional football team, and that is ultimately your 9 to 5, isn't it? And you've got everything, a whole team catered around you. That's where you start to see, from the ages of 18 to 20, the gap really does lengthen between those who really push on and make a career out of football, and those who tailor out and whether they play with their friends on a Sunday or play just for a bit of enjoyment. That's where the kind of levels really vary. If
you were to, I think I find guys like you really inspirational, if I'm honest, because I think, we work with professional footballers at a very high level, and then we see guys like you who you go to work and then you try and do what they're doing on top of your work as well. I think that's hard work. That's really hard work.
It is, and I say to myself sometimes, I mean, I've had a lot of friends. I was never at an academy, so I never had a taste of, playing at the elite level. But I've had friends that have been in the system, in the academy systems, in the professional game, since they were about 10, 11 years old. And unfortunately, by the time they get to 17, 16, 17, the motivation for them, it really peters out, and it's kind of all they know. So the motivation kind of dies away by that time, when it actually really matters. And I mean, like I've always said to my friends, I mean, if I could, be in your opportunity and be in your shoes and treat, being a professional footballer as a 9 to 5, I don't think I'd ever look back. But like you said, it is difficult. You've had a long day at work or whatever, and it's freezing cold. And probably the last thing you want to do is go to the gym or go over the park and do a session. It's something that just ultimately, has to come from within, really. And like I said a bit earlier on, you're in a situation where you play at my level where you're not going to have your coach ringing you, asking you what you're up to or anything like that. Quite frankly, no one really is going to be there to, push you that extra mile or anything like that. So ultimately, the motivation has to come from yourself and kind of what you want to achieve from whatever you're doing, whether that's football or any other sport. And probably, I think that motivation for me probably came during my period of time out with my knee injury.
So I think, George, just let me stop you there. So you've had some quite complex injuries, haven't you? You've had if you don't mind me saying, well, you talk to me about them just in case I blow your cover.
Yeah, no. So I'm 20 now. When you're 17, turning to 18, you go from youth football to men's football. So the youth football all stops, and you find a men's club and you go and play from there. And I mean, as any teenager going into play men's football, I think the first thing you kind of think of is try and put on some weight and just to ensure that you can compete, with the grown, fully nurtured men that you're going to be playing against. So I spent that summer in the gym. And like I said, with the lack of knowledge or lack of support or advice from anyone at the time, the work that I was doing in the gym was very robust, single muscle movements, not much leg work, not much mobility or movement stuff. So over that summer,
we using the machine quite a bit in the gym rather than doing like free weights or functional type.
Yeah. So again, like this was at a time where this is the first time I kind of went to the gym. So as a beginner, you know, you go on the weights, you have a crack at the weights, whether that's the push machine or the leg machine or the bicep machine or anything like that, and kind of pick it up as you go along. And I mean, when you're going into a gym, you the people around you are all kind of doing the same thing, because there's not many people in there that are, number one, know exactly what they're doing, or number two, everyone trains for different reasons, right? And I was training to you know, benefit from football. And over that summer, I got rather top heavy from, you know, the waist upwards after going into the gym that summer, and not really working on, you know, any mobility stuff or anything like that, which obviously we learn now is probably one of the most important things. So from there, yeah, like I said, I started playing men's football, which is tough in itself, which is a change in itself, you know. You're playing Tuesdays, Saturdays, the training's more intense, less recovery time. Everyone demands more from you. So obviously my body was taking its toll just from that. But it was around Christmas time, 2017, I started getting pain in my knee to the point that it got unbearable. At the start of 2018, had a couple of MRI scans, which resulted in it being diagnosed for patellar tendonitis. That's where, you know, at that time, I got told that, you know, physiotherapy and a bit of rest would be suitable for that to be kind of all resulted absolutely fine, and then everything would be okay. So it was probably about March, April time, about 4 or 5 months now of physiotherapy that I had, and nothing had changed. So I went back to the consultant, who then suggested knee surgery for it. And I mean, again, at that time, I was 18, and I was going to see these consultants myself. So in the back of my mind, you know, you're paying this money, and you're seeing these people to make the best decisions for you. So in my mind at the time, I was probably a bit naive to just accepting that rather than venturing out elsewhere to find advice or anything like that. So I agreed knee surgery. It was obviously the best port of call if it's something that he advised, which I went with. Only minor surgery, you know, it wasn't an ACL reconstruction or anything like that, but it still took, you know, 3 to 4 months rehab beyond that. So this was June 2018. And then at that point, I you know, I had a lot of time out. I weren't playing, I weren't training or anything like that. So I think injuries like that, you become obsessed with different other things, obviously like the rehab side of things and knowing about your body and things like that. So at that point, I was doing a little bit more research, and I came across a Czech practitioner, and kind of done a bit of research in regards to what they do and stuff like that, and started training with someone who was a bit more specialized to what you guys do in regards to, you know, making the body move in the best manner possible for what you need it to move for, type thing. And I started to do my rehab with him. But you know, you're looking at this point where I got the injury first in January of 2018, and now it's about October time. So you know, I've missed basically the bulk of the year with no physical activity, which is demanding mentally more than physically, in my opinion. I mean, when you go from knowing nothing but playing football or whatever sport you do, from then having all that time out, and like I said, going back to what I said, you know, when you're playing semi-professionally, there's no support around that. I don't think I heard from my manager that entire time, you know. So that side of things as well is very physically, you know, mentally demanding as well as physically.
So Stan and I had a session earlier in the week about athletes and getting back into sport, and that's one thing we touched on quite a lot, the whole mental emotional side of that injury recovery. and how like,
Definitely.
the people around the players should help, or athletes should help support them, and not just physically and not just nutritionally, but also the psychological aspect of that return to sport. It's so important. How much do you think that plays in terms of the athletes' return to sport from your perspective, George?
100%. I mean, obviously, everyone's mental mind frame is different. You know, I always kind of thought that in periods of that time, it's, you know, a sink or swim approach. You either, you know, you level up from it and you find more motivation from it, or you go the other way where it's difficult. But I don't think it should be like that. You know, I think there should be a plan for people in place when recovering from these injuries. It's a long process, and I think it's ups and downs, isn't it, across the whole entire board. You know, you're one training session you could be back on track, and then you take a knock back, etc. So it is difficult. I think the most difficult part of my return to play was actually when I was back on the pitch. And obviously such a long time out, in my mind, I'm imagining me playing before the injury, and before the length of time out, getting back onto the field or the track or whatever you may be, and not being at the level that you're expecting to be, in your own mind, is the most frustrating, because I think once you have such a period of time out, you kind of expect it in the back of your mind to be back to normal just from them, but then you realize you have a whole other process to kind of compete with, which is, for me, it was the most difficult part. Definitely. I mean, the time out is kind of everything's taken away from you, you know, so you learn to live with it. But when you're back into training with your teammates, etc., and you're not at the level you want to be, that's when I had my doubts, you know, should I be continuing to do this? Am I going to be the same type thing? So that was the most difficult part for me.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Stan, you must have come across this quite a bit, haven't you, with your dipping in and dipping out of, dip in constantly with athletics, really. But I know you've worked with a lot of footballers and rugby as well. So you must come across that quite a bit, because athletics is not a contact sport, but football and rugby, they're contact sports. So the injury rate's presumably a lot higher than, in terms of traumatic injury that's going to wipe an athlete out. You must have come across that quite a bit with working with football and rugby, right?
Yeah, it is. I think George has put it out really, very clearly, and I could identify with the emotions he was expressing there.
Yeah.
Because you see them on the field of play, they might not be able to articulate them, verbally, but the body has got a language in which it articulates those doubts. You can see how, there are deficits within their movement patterns. You can tell they've got a lot more, there's a lot more movement inside them, but they're not able to bring out the full range of movement, even though they want to. So you can see the frustration between what their mind thinks they should be doing and what the body is, is only able to bring out. Those disparities, you can see them, and you can almost see the pain and the frustration. This is where the intervention then comes in from a coaching standpoint, where it's not this player or this athlete, they're not looking for skill development because they already have that. What they're looking for at that point in time, the biggest intervention is how to upskill their emotional aptitude, how to upskill their mental aptitude so that they can bring out the physical skills that are inside them. The muscle has got a memory. This stuff is already in there, but unless the muscles themselves are confident enough to express themselves without apprehension of pain, then the body will always be holding back.
Yeah.
And then that's what creates the whole frustration, from a player point of view and athlete point of view. That's where the coach comes in, the role of the coach and all the supporting staff, by the way, which is what George there pointed out, which I really agree with and find interesting also, is that it's not just from working on a particular injury and the treatment that particular injury receives. it's everything else, the whole support network around the player whilst they are recovering from the injury. All that helps in building up the confidence, in building up the confidence for them to be able to get back. So when they get there, when they're able to get back to the track, get back on the field of play, they have all this support network around them, so that what you want to do is minimize the voices of doubt inside their head, inside their emotions, inside their muscles. And for that can only take place if during the period of injury, they are getting supportive and positive messages alongside rehabilitation.
Yeah. I think the one thing that's quite interesting, when you strip it all back and all said and done, that you've got muscle, which generally, if you had a piece of muscle, unless it's got a nerve going to it, that muscle actually doesn't do very much by itself. So you can pretty much just leave it there and it will kind of just stay there. So unless it's cardiac muscle or smooth muscle in the digestive tract, cardiac being around the heart, it doesn't have any connection with the body, as far as like nothing's telling it what to do if it's by itself. It can't, there's no reflex, there's no stimulus, there's no inhibition, there's nothing. So, and I think as an osteopath, as a musculoskeletal practitioner, it's really, it's so important to remember that, because you fix the muscle or you get the muscle functioning better, but it's the nervous system that's going to be the barrier to getting people back. Now that can come from the physical nervous system, as in the connection. So you have nerve damage, you have other things going on as well. The nutritional nervous system, so the blood supply and the nerve supply to the nerve are very, very important to help recovery. So if you've got someone with very stiff hips, like we're going to talk about with George later, that's going to really have an impact on the blood flow down to the knee and the recovery rate. But you've also got the psychological component, because that's all nervous energy that's going to be directed through the flow of confidence or movement inhibition, as you referred to earlier. That's so important to understand. And I think that's a big area in physiotherapy and osteopathy that's missed a lot of the time when we're looking at recovery from athletes, because if you just do osteo and physio by itself, it's great, but there's this other element of the psychological bit that's really where the magic happens when it gets better, when you get an athletes back into high performance and like weekend warriors back into running and confidently without getting re-injuries. It's like a massively underplayed part of their recovery.
Yeah,
it's huge. It's really interesting to hear firsthand from you, George, what really happens in an athlete's mind.
Yeah, and I mean, in my experience, I jumped from youth football to men's football is almost like a completely different sport. And I had about a 3-month kind of stint as an 18-year-old before my injury. 18 months down the line, when I was back training again, the doubt is indefinitely there. Can I go back to that performance type thing, etc.? Am I good enough to be competing at this level, etc.? Especially when I didn't, have too much background history to kind of back myself up. I wasn't 5 years experienced, and I've had an injury and I've come back. It was at the very start of, this men's career. So that's very difficult as well. And what Stan pointed out is so correct. I mean, I remember for the first 3 months, I was training and playing with such a kind of safety catch that it was, going back to thinking about it now, it was almost embarrassing. Where I think I was kind of handicapping my potential. And because again, you train in an hour on a Tuesday, an hour on a Thursday, you're not getting into the squad because you're not providing enough quality on those training sessions. It's kind of like a negative spiral. And I think I go back to where I really progressed this season. I made the jump to move to a football club in the same league, but at a lesser financial level, and you like to say a lesser club with not as much backing, in order to play consistently and play games. And the manager put faith in me and trust in me and had that support with me, and then from that season, this is the season where I've really flourished and got back to the level where I was hoping to be. So it is definitely a mindset thing more than anything else. given the fact that obviously the body is right.
Yeah, no, very interesting. So, Stan and George, and maybe I'll ask you both this question, but in terms of your recovery, George, because we've dealt locally with the knee and we've helped you with that, which we used some shockwave with, which has helped to accelerate it.
Yeah.
We've looked at your foot. We diagnosed the stress fracture that you had there. Now, the stress fracture we think came about because of like the way you're moving differently and the extra load on the area, possibly trauma. So that's been like a really good thing to pick up early. Then we've kind of passed you over to Stan, and Stan's been working with you from a movement perspective. But what kind of things have you picked up, George, from Stan in terms of like what you were doing incorrectly with movement? Because I know Steve has worked with you a lot in terms of the gym-based corrective exercise, but more dynamic stuff about movement and like more sport-specific stuff. What do you think has been the key takeaway from those sessions?
I think the thing with the sessions I've had with Stan, I think that the things that highlighted me to the most was, you know, how Stan really picked apart, you know, different parts of the body to show the indifferences. I mean, when you think of running, you think of both legs running at the same speed or at the same, you know, at the same level, the same distance, etc. But just after a few kind of drills that Stan done with me, he showed that actually the movement off my left leg in comparison to the right had a lot less power, which then you, like you said, you strip it back and makes a lot of sense. Why I've been getting injuries down that side, why that side causes me problems with not only injuries but, you know, tightness and back problems, etc. And it just allows you to look at it from a point of view. And I think from my point of view, I've been trying to build up a network where I've got specialists like you, Stephen, and Stan and Steve as well, that, you know, Stan has highlighted a problem for me where the left side is not as powerful as the right side. I can then take that information back to you and Steve for them to create a plan for me to make sure that I am working on that, whether that's, you know, outside with Stan on the track or in the gym with Steve, or even, you know, on the physio bed with you, to highlight those things. And I think many things, you know, there's a blanket approach for the majority of things these days. You know, if your legs aren't strong enough, do a squat type thing, if you know what I mean. But when you strip it down and you look at it, where the right side, the testings that we were doing with Stan from the right side of things seemed to be okay, but you look to the left side of the leg and the directions I was going with the left side, and there's a lot of work to be done, and it's just kind of seeing the specialists like yourselves to unravel that and try to make sense to it in an athlete's mind like myself, just so you actually know that there's direction to where you're getting at, which was, I think, the best thing that I got from my sessions with Stan, most definitely.
Brilliant. And Stan, what do you think the key things are with regards to getting that athlete back in terms of their sport and movement in particular?
I think what is key there is really the analysis, the assessments, you know, the diagnostic phase where you are re-establishing what the variances are. Because once they've come from rehab and, you know, they've been given all clear, you know, which is usually from a structural point of view in terms of their musculature, maybe, you know, the skeletal, you know, properties, as it were, maybe that is fine. But what they really want to do is play football. What they really want to do with the fitness they're looking for is a fitness to meet the demands of the sport that they want to play.
Yeah.
In this case, George, it was to play football. And therefore, we have to take this body that has been repaired and put it under the test of the demands of football or the demands of track and field. And from it, that should be able to reveal just how, you know, just how optimal the recovery has been for them to be able to meet those demands. And as George has pointed out, he probably was feeling a lot fine and fit enough to get back and, you know, and play his football. But just a few diagnostic tools and protocols on the field of play were able to show the variances between the left side and the right side. This is between the right foot, the right leg, and the left leg. I think, George, you would concur with me that when we did, I think one of the variances was so huge, the differences was almost up to a second, you know, in just
over a very short period of time as well.
Yeah, you know, just to change direction from going to the left and going to the right. Now, what that implies is it's not just the stats that we're getting there. What it implies is that what his muscles are doing in terms of force production, there is a variance in terms of muscular length and the muscular velocities, you know, to meet those directional changes.
Yeah.
You know, and if he had continued to load and get in a game situation, you know, those forces, the left side will not be able to dissipate the forces that he generates adequately for it to leave him in a safe situation. So you're putting him back in a place of vulnerability, you know, to create injuries, because that side of the body is not yet able to contain the forces that he is generating.
Yeah,
definitely. I think. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I mean, I think that's probably the most important thing I've taken from being injured, and probably go on to this a bit later on. But it's all well and good, you know, having a knee injury or a foot injury, curing that, and then going back to playing the sport. I think the most important thing for any athlete is to, you know, discover why that, you know, for instance, you know, some, you know, injuries are contact directly in that area, which could be the cause of it. But I think diagnosing the root problem to the injury gets you back out onto the field, but also reduces potential risk of injury further down the line. Which is definitely the most important thing in my opinion.
I think that's really astute of you, George. I think there's a lot of people that, even therapists that have been qualified for a long time, can miss that, because I think there's an inherent drive in a therapist to be able to get someone back, but sometimes that's almost at the expense of finding out why they were injured in the first place. Definitely. And a lot of the advice that we give to people on Facebook and when we're talking to them through market about that, you've got to find, it's great to get better and we can get you better, but we need to work out why you were injured in the first place, which sounds expensive, but if you think about the long term, it's much cheaper to find out from a cost perspective. It's much cheaper from a time perspective as well, because you're not going to go through the heartache of having that trauma and the injury like keep recurring over and over again if you deal with it properly in the first instance. And I think a lot of people want to save money on like go and see people. They want to see someone who's going to give them a quick fix, and often you can do the quick fix, but you'll be quick fixing for the rest of your life unless you deal with the real source of the problem. Yeah. And
I think both of my injuries are representations of that. I mean, the knee injury, all of my physiotherapy over, like I mentioned, in the first 4 or 5 months that I had, was just localized around the area of the knee. And when I had the knee surgery, I done about, again, another 3 or 4 months of rehab myself, which is again just localized around the knee area. And it wasn't until I felt, like Stan said, I felt okay to go back and train. I thought, hang on a minute, there's no way I've been out for, 9-12 months and I'm going to be able to, go back and just train off my own back, and everything else body wise is going to be okay. So that's when I got in touch with Steve, the Czech practitioner. And that's when he started to really unravel all of the problems that were probably the root cause for the knee injury. But at that point, this is, 10 months down the line. So if I went and, like you said, that's 10 months, 4 months of physiotherapy, paying for a knee surgery, 2 MRI scans. Whereas if I went to, unravel the, or went to someone, and found the root cause of it when that first happened in December, January time, I could have been back playing injury-free with no traumatic experience of, rehab or surgery or anything like that within 2 or 3 months. So I think that's a prime example.
Yeah. That's good. So Stan, with George, where are we heading with George in terms of getting him back to like top performance?
Yeah, it's working on those variances that we thrashed out, which came to the surface through various field protocols, and for that to happen, it's almost what George himself has referred to. It's all interdisciplinary input on it, the different practitioners that are working on the different components of it. So going forward here is addressing those variances now, in terms of force output, in terms of the range of motion on that left side, that needs to be increased. We also need to increase, his dynamic stability within that. So he's able to check, he's able to employ, appropriate change of direction that suits his game. The dominant factor in his performance is the speed, and that in itself requires a very dynamic, stability within his ankle joints and knee joints and the hip joints. So that has got to be worked out, on a very progressive, steady but progressive regime. He's a very keen and a very determined athlete. So it's not difficult on that front because he's got a lot of self-drive to achieve that.
Yeah.
But that's the structure, that's the pattern, and that's the journey that he has to, we have to take him on.
Brilliant.
Gently, but bit by bit, going up through all his joints, the ankle, the knee, and the hip in that order, but all at the same time, but also in parts, so that every sensory resource that he has got to be woken up. And every joint resource that he has got to be woken up. So the aggregate then gives George what George should be able to do on a field of play.
Yeah. Stan, when we were talking about the return from injury, you a couple of days ago when we did the last session, one of the things that I really took home was the fact that actually George is capable of doing all this stuff. What we're doing as practitioners is removing the obstruction from George being able to perform.
Yeah.
Which indeed. I think is quite...
What would have come in there, during the period of injury and rehab, a lot of barriers, a lot of inhibitions would have been accumulating. For every time that he is not on the field of play expressing himself optimally, he is accumulating, inhibitive properties within the musculature, within his neuromuscular patterns. And of course, within his emotional and mental faculties, he is accumulating those inhibitions. Now, we're not teaching George new skills in football. No, it's just going in and removing those neuromuscular inhibitions in whatever form that they reside within his movement pathways, or in whatever forms that they manifest themselves in his movement pathways. So we're removing those inhibitions and those barriers that limit the optimal output of his the force that he generates and expresses on the field of play.
Yeah, good. That sounds exciting. George, you're in for one hell of a ride, my friend.
No, I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent.
So far, so good.
Yeah, good stuff. Good. Right, before we go, I just thought I'd ask you both one last question. So, George, what would say? There's a lot of people watching, and I think it's really important to give value in these sessions. But this is the Perfect Balance Clinic Hour of Power, and it's about people regaining control of their health after they've had injuries or want to recover quickly. So, what would you say your top 3 tips are for people to help regain their health and fitness?
So off the back of injury?
Yeah, just in general or off the back of injury. What do you think you've learned most about your experience?
Patience, 100%. Massive. I think you almost have to, trust the process that you're going through. And when you're in touch, I think it's a lot easier when you're in touch with specialists like yourself, Stan and Steve, because you know the information's correct. And I mean, anyone, I think at any level of football or any sport, you know, you always want to be getting back onto the field quicker or be doing slightly better, etc. At any given time. I think that's just a bit of a given, but definitely patience is number one for me. I think you can. I'm guilty for it. You know, you always think you can find a shortcut that no one's thought of before, or no specialist in the world knows, or anything like that. But ultimately, patience is number one. Number two as well is persistence, which comes in line with you know, patience as well. You know, you can wait 6 months for your injury to heal, but you know, with no help or motivation or anything like that, you're not going to get anywhere ultimately. So I think them two are definitely the most important factors. You know, persistence, coming back from an injury, or even just getting into top physical condition at any kind of level, has its ups and downs, because you know it's something that's difficult to do, and that's why many people, you know, don't do it. But definitely just trying to find that motivation from somewhere at any given time. For me, was being important for me. And number three, I'd say knowledge. You know, it's all well and good getting back to, you know, at a certain aspect, whether that's coming back from injury, rehab, or starting a new sport or anything like that. But I think doing research, whether that's online or with yourselves or with books or anything like that, trying to find, you know, the best information out there for whatever's tailored for you is, you know, is so important. I think you can spend years, you know, following the wrong information. So yeah, working out knowledge and getting the correct information is probably up there as well. So those would definitely be my top three.
Brilliant, awesome. Awesome. Thanks very much for sharing those, George. Very wise words.
Welcome.
You want to listen to that. So, Stan, you've got some sessions to help people, haven't you, that are going to be going on, just like George actually. So helping people with the running and improving their performance. When are those?
That is on Friday. It's a Friday at 4:30. So that's the question and answer session. And it covers broadly, but really much within the performance and sports performance, you know, direction. So that should be brilliant, should be exciting. If I may add something on what you know, takeaways that George mentioned there. Yeah, and if you notice that George has picked out from his takeaways, he's picked out the first two really have nothing to do with the body. Yeah, you know. You have nothing to do with the body. And that's exactly, you know, what performance is about. If we negate the importance of emotional and mental faculties, we'll always fall short on what the body can do. And patience and persistence, as he you know, he highlights them out, those are really key. Now, patience would come in handy if you appreciate that movement is not genetic. It's the capacity to move that is genetic. Movement itself is a skill. Movement itself is a skill. Running is a skill. Anything that we're doing regarding locomotion is a skill. In other words, we need to take time and have the patience to learn how to do it. We never just learn it by just following what other people are doing. It's all very and well to do that, but usually we started thinking about what we are doing after an injury. That's when we start thinking clearly and, you know, in a more interested way on what we need to do. But let's appreciate that. What a human being has got is the capacity to move. How to move, that is something that has to be acquired. It has to be learned.
Amen, friend.
Agreed.
A nice one. Good. Listen, if you've been watching live on Facebook or you're watching the replay, I've been Stephen McInerney. This has been Stan Mediri, our high performance and movement coach. And this has been my friend, George Quarrington Carter, who's going to be an awesome footballer. You need to watch this kid. He's going to be brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I can concur with
that. And George, I think you've been absolutely inspirational tonight. I think your goals are just, your your ways of people being able to regain their control of their health. It's not just about football, it's about life. It's about patience, perseverance, and knowledge. I think those are massively important tools that anyone that wants to regain control of their health or life it would be hard pressed not to listen to those. So I think that's
no,
really
100%, definitely. I mean, yeah, like you said, it goes into all aspects of life, doesn't it? So it's definitely important.
Excellent. Good stuff. If you've enjoyed what you've listened to tonight, we've got another hour of power tomorrow night. And we've got Maud, one of our osteopaths, coming online. She's going to be talking about some things related to osteopathy and about improving your body from a mechanical perspective. So don't forget, tomorrow night, 8 o'clock or 5 minutes past 8 with all the technical issues we have. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. But for now, it's bye-bye from me and bye-bye from the big guys.
Okay, cheers.
See you later.
See you later. Thanks a lot.